The first time the thing inside the Bell farm spoke to me, I thought my younger brother was hiding somewhere upstairs trying to scare me, until the voice answered me again from inside the bedroom wall, directly beside my head. You're listening to True Haunting Log, where we share real haunted incidents from real people around the globe, and if you've experienced something you can't explain, send your story to truehauntinglog@gmail.com. Story 1. The Voice in the Walls. This happened on a farm near Adams, Tennessee, long before people turned the Bell Witch into campfire stories and exaggerated legends. Back when the Bell property was simply known as the place nobody wanted to stay after dark. I was 16 then, working alongside the Bell family helping with livestock and repairs during harvest season, and at first nothing about the property seemed unusual except for how isolated it felt compared to neighboring farms. The Bell house sat surrounded by open fields and thick tree lines far enough from town that nights there became unnaturally quiet once the lanterns were extinguished. No nearby roads, no neighboring voices, just darkness stretching across farmland while wind moved through the woods beyond the property. During daytime, the farm felt ordinary enough: busy work, animals, family meals, children running through the yard. But after sunset, the atmosphere shifted in ways difficult to explain unless you experienced it yourself. People stopped speaking loudly, doors stayed locked earlier than necessary, and nobody willingly crossed the upper hallway alone at night. At first I thought the stories surrounding the property were exaggerated, rumors spread by nearby settlers, because isolated farms always attract superstition eventually. Some neighbors claimed strange animals appeared near the fields after dark. Others swore they heard voices near the house late at night despite nobody standing outside. But the Bell family themselves rarely discussed any of it directly, which honestly made the place feel worse. Fear becomes more convincing when people avoid naming it entirely. The first strange thing I personally experienced happened during my second week staying there. I had gone upstairs shortly after midnight after helping secure livestock during a storm moving across the property. Everyone else appeared asleep already, and the upper floor felt completely still, except for weak rain tapping against the roof overhead. I remember lying awake listening to the storm because something about the house felt tense that night, almost like everyone inside it was pretending to sleep instead of actually resting. Then I heard whispering somewhere down the hallway, quiet at first, too soft to understand clearly. I assumed one of the Bell children had gotten out of bed, so I ignored it initially, but after several minutes the whispering continued without stopping. Not conversation exactly, more like someone speaking continuously beneath their breath. Finally I sat up and called softly into the hallway, "Who's awake?" The whispering stopped immediately. Complete silence followed for several seconds. Then a young boy's voice answered quietly from somewhere near the staircase, "Come downstairs." I relaxed slightly hearing that because I recognized the voice as sounding similar to one of the younger Bell boys. I grabbed the lantern beside the bed and stepped into the hallway, but the moment I opened the door, the entire upstairs looked empty. No movement, no candlelight. Nothing except darkness stretching toward the staircase. "Where are you?" I asked quietly. Silence answered again. Then, the same voice spoke a second time, much closer now, "Right here." The sound came from inside the wall beside me, not behind it, inside it. My chest tightened instantly because the voice sounded unnaturally clear through the wood, close enough that whoever spoke seemed inches from my ear. I stumbled backward hard enough to nearly drop the lantern, and the moment I moved, something scratched slowly across the inside of the wall from one end of the hallway to the other. Not rats, not settling wood, deliberate movement following the length of the corridor beside me. Then the whispering started again, this time directly behind my bedroom door. I remember standing frozen in that hallway listening to the whispering behind my bedroom door because the sound made no sense at all. I had just stepped out of that room seconds earlier. Nobody could have entered without passing me in the hallway, and yet now something inside the room was speaking softly enough that I still couldn't make out the words clearly. The scratching inside the walls stopped completely while the whispering continued, low and steady, like someone talking directly against the wood. from the other side. My first thought was that one of the Bell children was playing some kind of cruel joke, but deep down, I already knew it wasn't that simple. Children don't move through locked rooms without sound. I slowly raised the lantern higher and stepped back toward the bedroom door. The whispering stopped the moment my hand touched the handle. Then silence settled across the hallway so completely I could hear rainwater moving through the gutters outside. For several seconds I just stood there staring at the door, trying to convince myself to open it. Finally, I pushed it inward quickly and lifted the lantern toward the room. Nobody was there. The bed remained untouched exactly where I left it. The window was still latched shut. No hiding place existed anywhere inside that small room. But something else had changed. The temperature inside felt noticeably colder than the hallway. Not winter cold, damp cold, like air trapped underground too long. Then the voice spoke again, right beside my ear. "You left the door open." I spun around so fast the lantern nearly slipped from my hand, but the hallway behind me remained empty. My pulse hammered painfully while I backed into the room instinctively, and the moment I crossed the doorway, the bedroom door slammed shut hard enough to rattle the walls. Downstairs, someone immediately shouted awake. Another door opened somewhere below. Then I heard hurried footsteps moving through the house while the storm outside intensified around the roof. Mr. Bell himself came upstairs carrying a lantern only moments later, his face looking exhausted in a way that immediately told me this wasn't new to him. He didn't ask what happened. He just looked toward the closed bedroom door behind me and sighed quietly, like someone hearing a familiar problem return again. "Did it speak to you yet?" he asked. The question unsettled me more than the voice itself because there was no disbelief in his expression, no confusion, only tired recognition. I told him what happened while the rest of the family slowly gathered nearby in the hallway, and the longer I described the voice inside the wall, the more uncomfortable everyone became. None of them looked surprised. One of the younger children started crying quietly when I mentioned the scratching sounds. Mrs. Bell immediately pulled the child closer, without saying anything. Then, before anyone else could speak, a woman's voice whispered softly from somewhere downstairs. He heard me. Every person in the hallway went completely silent. The voice sounded calm, almost conversational, but it came from nowhere identifiable. Not one room, not one direction. It moved through the house itself. Mr. Bell lowered his head briefly after hearing it. "Ignore it," he said quietly to everyone. "Do not answer." The problem was the thing inside the house didn't stop speaking after that. Over the following days, it became impossible to pretend the voices were imagination because they happened constantly now, especially after dark. Sometimes the whispering moved through empty rooms upstairs. Other nights, footsteps crossed the hallway slowly, while everyone remained gathered downstairs together. And more than once, I heard voices calling people by name from different parts of the house, even though the rooms were empty when checked. But the worst part wasn't the noises, it was how intelligent the thing seemed. It listened to conversations, repeated private information nobody else should have known, mimicked voices perfectly, and slowly, over time, everyone inside the Bell house stopped trusting what they heard after sunset. Then one night during supper, while the entire family sat together at the table, the voice spoke clearly from the ceiling directly above us. "One of you's leaving soon." The moment the voice spoke from the ceiling above the supper table, every person in the room froze so completely that even the sound of rain outside seemed louder afterward. Nobody looked upward immediately. And that was the strangest part. It felt like everyone in the Bell house had already learned instinctively that acknowledging the thing too quickly only encouraged it. The voice itself sounded calm, female, almost gentle, but there was something deeply wrong beneath the tone, like the words were being repeated by something that understood speech without understanding people. Mrs. Bell quietly lowered her eyes toward the table while one of the younger children started trembling beside her. "Mr." Bell remained completely still for several seconds before speaking in a strained voice. "Keep eating." nobody moved. Then, slowly, footsteps crossed the ceiling directly above us, measured, evenly spaced, following the length of the upstairs hallway from one end of the house to the other. The sound felt impossible because everyone was downstairs together. I remember counting the steps without meaning to. 7, across the hall. Pause. Then 7 back the other direction. The voice laughed softly after the second pass. Not loudly, quietly amused. "You're listening now," it whispered. The atmosphere inside the Bell house changed completely after that night. Whatever lived there had stopped behaving like random noises or distant whispers. It wanted interaction now, attention, fear. And the more emotionally unsettled the family became, the more active the thing seemed to grow. Sleep became almost impossible inside the house after midnight because the voices moved constantly through the walls and hallways. Some nights, they whispered beside bedroom doors for hours. Other nights, they mimicked members of the family calling each other from different rooms until nobody could tell whether the voices were real anymore. More than once, I watched people answer someone who hadn't actually spoken. I began noticing changes in the family too. Small at first. Everyone looked exhausted all the time. Conversations became shorter, meals quieter, and nobody willingly stayed alone anywhere inside the house after dark. Even Mr. Bell started carrying a lantern through rooms during daytime, like part of him expected the thing to still be there watching. But the worst effect fell on Betsy Bell. She was only a young girl, quiet and polite before all this started, but over time the thing inside the house became increasingly focused on her specifically. At first it only called her name occasionally from empty rooms upstairs. Then it began imitating her voice at night while she slept downstairs beside her mother. One evening I heard her crying alone near the kitchen shortly after sunset and asked what was wrong. She hesitated before answering like she was afraid, saying it aloud would make it worse. Then quietly she told me the voice had started speaking to her before she fell asleep at night. "What does it say?" I asked. Her expression tightened immediately. "It knows things," she whispered. Before I could ask what she meant, a voice spoke softly from somewhere near the pantry behind us. "So do you." Betsy screamed instantly and stumbled backward hard enough to knock over a chair while I spun toward the pantry with the lantern raised. But the small room beyond remained empty, except for hanging herbs and storage barrels. Then something moved inside the wall behind the shelves, not scratching this time, crawling. Slow, deliberate movement crossing through the wood itself, from one side of the pantry to the other. The voice followed it. "He shouldn't stay here," it whispered. My chest tightened because the words sounded directed at Betsy, not me. Then, the movement stopped directly behind the wall beside my shoulder. Silence filled the kitchen for several seconds, and softly, close enough that it sounded inches from my ear again, the voice said something that stayed with me long after leaving the Bell property. "The house hears all of you now." After the thing said the house heard all of us now, I stopped thinking about the Bell property as a haunted house and started thinking about it as something alive. Because whatever existed there no longer behaved like random paranormal activity. It reacted, it listened, and worst of all, it adapted. The voices became more personal after that night. They no longer repeated simple phrases or whispered names from empty rooms. Now they used private conversations against people. Secrets, spoken quietly during the day, returned through the walls after dark. Arguments repeated themselves upstairs hours later in distorted voices while everyone sat downstairs in silence pretending not to hear. One night, Mrs. Bell broke down crying because the thing started speaking in her dead mother's voice from the upstairs hallway. Another evening, the younger children heard their father calling them outside after midnight while he slept downstairs beside the fireplace. Every time someone answered a voice instinctively, the activity worsened afterward like the house itself rewarded interaction. Neighbors stopped visiting after sunset completely. Word had spread beyond the farm by then, and although some people still dismissed the stories publicly, very few were willing to remain inside the Bell house once darkness fell. preacher from a nearby town attempted staying overnight to prove the haunting false, but before sunrise he left the property pale and shaking without fully explaining what happened. The only thing he admitted afterward was that something inside the house spoke to him using information nobody there should have known. I considered leaving several times during those weeks, but part of me stayed because I kept convincing myself there had to be a rational explanation hidden underneath everything. Exhaustion, fear, isolation. Maybe the family had slowly poisoned each other psychologically over time, but deep down I already knew the truth. Fear alone doesn't speak from inside walls before people enter rooms. Then came the night I finally understood how dangerous the thing really was. I woke sometime before dawn because someone was whispering my name softly beside the bed. At first I thought one of the bellboys needed help outside, but the voice continued repeating my name with unnatural patience while the room remained completely dark around me. "Wake up," it whispered. "Come downstairs." My body moved before my thoughts fully caught up. That's the part that still disturbs me most years later. I didn't question the voice immediately. It already sounded familiar enough that part of my mind accepted it automatically. I grabbed the lantern and stepped into the hallway, half asleep, but the upstairs looked empty again. No movement, no candlelight, just darkness stretching toward the staircase. Then the whispering came from below. "Hurry." I started descending the stairs slowly while the old wooden steps shifted beneath my weight. The entire house felt silent except for the voice continuing somewhere ahead of me near the lower hallway. One step at a time, I followed it through the darkness until I reached the kitchen entrance. Then the whispering stopped. Complete silence settled across the room. I raised the lantern higher, expecting to finally catch someone standing there, but the kitchen was empty, chairs untouched, doors locked, nothing moving anywhere. A cold pressure crawled slowly through my chest as I realized something else instead. The front door was open. Not wide open, just slightly, barely enough for cold night air to move through the crack. I remember staring at it for several seconds while a horrible thought formed in my mind. I had never heard the voice call me downstairs. I had heard it call me outside. Then, from somewhere beyond the open doorway, out in the darkness near the fields, my own voice whispered softly back toward the house. "Come here." Hearing my own voice come from outside the bell house snapped whatever haze the thing had pulled me into because the sound was perfect. Exact tone, exact cadence, like someone had learned the shape of my voice well enough to wear it. I stopped moving immediately, lantern trembling slightly in my hand while cold air drifted through the partially open door from the fields outside. "Come here," my voice whispered again from the darkness. Softer this time, closer. Every instinct in my body screamed not to step outside, but another part of me kept trying to justify it logically. Maybe someone was hurt. Maybe another farmhand was playing a cruel joke. That confusion terrified me more than the voice itself because I realized the thing didn't need to overpower people physically. It only needed to make them doubt themselves long enough to follow it willingly. Then footsteps moved slowly across the porch outside the open doorway, measured, patient, not approaching the house, circling it. I backed away from the door immediately and the reaction came at once. The whispering inside the walls erupted around me from every direction at the same time. Not loud screaming. Worse. Calm, overlapping voices, speaking softly through the wood surrounding the kitchen. Some sounded like members of the Bell family. Others sounded like neighbors. A few sounded like me. He knows now. Don't let him leave. The house is listening. My pulse hammered violently while I stumbled backward toward the staircase, lantern light shaking across the walls as the whispering moved with me through the house. Then something struck the outside of the front door hard enough to rattle the frame. Not an animal, not wind, a deliberate impact from something standing directly outside. The voices stopped instantly afterward. Complete silence filled the Bell house again. Then, from upstairs, directly above my head, the woman's voice spoke one final sentence clearly enough that I still remember every word. "It almost brought you out." I didn't sleep the rest of that night. None of us did. The Bell family gathered together downstairs near the fireplace, while footsteps continued moving slowly across the roof and upper hallway until sunrise. Nobody spoke much anymore by that point because everyone inside the house had reached the same realization. The thing wasn't haunting the property randomly, it was studying the people living there, learning them, testing how easily voices could guide someone where it wanted them to go. I left the Bell farm less than a week later. Officially, I blamed exhaustion and family obligations elsewhere, but the truth was simpler than that. I genuinely believed if I stayed there much longer, the voices inside the house would eventually stop sounding wrong to me altogether. And once that happened, I wasn't sure I'd know the difference anymore between real people and whatever lived inside those walls. Years later, I still heard stories about the Bell property from travelers passing through Tennessee. Some claimed voices continued after the family left. Others swore future visitors heard whispering from empty rooms or footsteps crossing the upper hallway late at night. One man even claimed the house repeated private conversations back to him before dawn, exactly the way the Bell family once described. But the detail that stayed with me most came from another traveler who spent one evening near the abandoned property after sunset. He said the house itself felt quiet until someone spoke inside it. Then the walls answered back softly a few seconds later, using the same voice. Sometimes I still wake suddenly at night remembering that farm, the darkness, the whispering moving through the walls, the feeling that something unseen was listening from inside the house itself. And even now, years later, if I hear someone call my name unexpectedly in the dark, I wait before answering. Because some places don't just become haunted, some places learn the people living inside them, until eventually the house starts speaking back. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to True Haunting Log so you never miss the next encounter. And if you've ever heard voices in a place that should have been empty, send your story to truehauntinglog@gmail.com. And tell us in the comments, what other ghost topic do you want to hear real stories about next?